Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to some more StarCraft 2. Now when you're ahead, get more ahead. Some of you may have heard that quote from Protoss before, some of you may have not heard it and heard it for the first time right now. It's one of those quotes in StarCraft that applies to a lot of things. However, I never quite understood how I should apply it to my own game until a little while ago. So yesterday I did a coaching session with Neuro, who is a high grandmaster level player, very high level player, and he basically found a whole bunch of leaks in my game. Now, if you haven't checked out the coaching session yet, I will link that as the very first link right below the like button in the description of this video. But basically what he goes on about in pretty much all of my matchups and pretty much all of my matches is the lack of a fourth base and then also the lack of a hive. And in this game, in this specific match that I played right after the coaching, a couple hours afterwards, I actually tried to apply the knowledge that, he's been trying to show me. So in this specific game, I play very much so out of my comfort zone, and I play a little bit differently than I normally do. And what I want to discuss here is how I can basically get more ahead by not attacking. And this is one of those concepts that I know very well is true, but I didn't really know how to apply it very much. So, most of the time, as you may be aware, when I play 3 base versus a Protoss player and they also take their 3rd base, I try my very hardest to basically pressure their 3rd base, knowing that if Protoss maxes out, I'm gonna have a very hard time canceling out any kind of army, because Protoss armies are very, very powerful. Now, I didn't really realize it, but that is very much so a Heart of the Swarm-esque aspect of the game. Like, in Heart of the Swarm, if Protoss maxed out, you were in significant amount of trouble, because, no amount of armies seem to be able to kill that very easily at all. Now, in Legacy of the Void, we obviously have all kinds of late-game buffs. We got Ravages, we got Lurkers that can be very annoying as well to your opponent, and all I know, it basically means that you can go toe-to-toe, even in the late game with the Protoss player. And while I was aware of that as well, I didn't really know how to apply that. So in this specific game, my opponent, and obviously it's going to be a little bit later on into the game, not really applicable for some of the higher leagues, but in this specific game, my opponent is going to go ahead and take a relatively quick 3rd, at which point I take a 4th base. And that is something that I never really did, okay? I would simply just try and pressure the 3rd base, try and just close out the game right there, or at least establish a solid advantage, or at that point, throw away the game and, basically get such a deficit at that point that I'm just not able to follow it up with anything. Now, this is one of those concepts that is interesting. It's very, very difficult to think about when you're, you don't have someone else pointing it out for you, okay? Like, I've obviously analyzed my own games, but I did not really realize that I didn't tech up to a hive quickly enough simply because I was lacking a 4th base. Like, if you don't have 8 gas geysers going, teching up to a hive and getting like a very gas-heavy army up is very, very difficult. Now, I've been applying this in Zerg vs Terran, Zerg vs Protoss, and also Zerg vs Zerg, and so far, it's actually gone very, very well. So basically, instead of attacking when I feel like I can probably close out the game, I should make the assumption that my opponent is good enough to not lose, and then follow it up with a whole bunch of drones instead and expand while teching up. And that is obviously gonna give me a guaranteed advantage, right? So there's obviously always, for example, this is another good example, I suppose. When you run by with Zerglings in a Protoss main base, for example, right? When you run by with a couple Zerglings, you could either kill the workers, which gives you a guaranteed lead, or you could try and go ahead and get greedy and kill the Nexus. Now, many of you will probably have made this mistake at some point as well, where you try and snipe down the Nexus instead and it doesn't end up falling in the end. You're just simply gonna be very far behind at that point, where you could have gone for the guaranteed advantage and killed the probes instead. Now, this is a very similar concept right here. Instead of attacking when I see my opponent take a 3rd base, I go ahead and expand and drone up while getting more technology out as well. And obviously that is sort of like the arms race that we're in here, where we're trying to not just gain an edge economically speaking and army-wise, but also technology-wise. And that is one of those things that I struggle with, that I've been working on, and yesterday every single game after the coaching went extremely well. Actually, I believe I went 15 wins and 4 losses afterwards, and everything considered, it just followed up very nicely. Now, another thing that I also wasn't really used to very much is following up against Stargate play, which you can see out of my opponent right now, with Hydras and Queens into Lurkers instead of going straight up to, for example, Corruptors and trying to snipe trying to snipe a hatchery, which sometimes works out, at which point you're significantly ahead, but when it doesn't work out, you're putting yourself behind and at a very big risk. So I'm just making sure that I get a lot of workers out in this specific game, trying to obviously, do it to the best of my abilities. Now, I scout the 3rd base, and I immediately decide to pull a drone out and go straight for the 4th. Now this is actually slightly a little too early. I probably could have droned a little more greedy first. As you can see, I'm still having a bunch of larvae available, and I probably could have delayed this slightly, but it's still the concept that stands true. So instead of trying to basically put all of my eggs in one basket, try and finish out the game, knowing that he's gonna run out of energy on these phoenixes eventually, and he's not gonna have much to defend that third base, I can go ahead and just simply get the guaranteed advantage of making more drones right now. Because what's he gonna do? If he's making a third base, if he's gonna be making workers, and he's gonna try and obviously also do some harassment with phoenixes, there's very little army left over. If you take a quick look at the army that he literally has one zealot and one mothership core. Now there's a big chance, okay, once again I do want to emphasize it, there is a very big chance that I would be able to do a substantial amounts of damage. But the mothership core, photon overcharge, can hold on to a lot of stuff, and he already has warp gauge ready as well, so he can slowly warp in like 2 adepts at a time. So a Zergling run by probably would be able to do a little bit of damage, but I cannot guarantee it. What I can guarantee is making workers right now, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, while I'm definitely not doing it perfect in this match, as you can see, I don't really have much of an economy lead yet, and I haven't been as greedy as I could have. It's going a little better already. Now, what my plan is at this point, instead of going for the corruptor stuff, is one of those things Neuro pointed out to me as well. What he really likes to do is play Queen Hydra Lurker into Brute Lords in the late game. Now, Queen Hydra Lurker obviously does make a lot of sense. If you see him go for a Stargate, and you know that he's making phoenixes, that automatically also means that he will not have very many robotics units out there at all. And that automatically means that the counter to lurkers won't be available for another little while, and that is going to be disruptors. If he doesn't have any disruptors out, obviously that means that, you know, the lurkers are just going to be able to go to town. And as long as I have something to shield away those phoenixes from my lurkers, in for example Hydras and Queens, I'm going to be in a great position. Now, here you will notice I haven't played Hydras in quite some time against the lurker, or against phoenixes, because I decide to A-move with a bunch of my army, and all of my Hydralisks do get picked off, and that is, you know, just a simple fix. You just have to wait a little bit longer. Just wait a second, make sure you get some extra units out before you move into the Hydras, shoo them away, and then drone up super greedily. So while I definitely do have an advantage right now worker-wise, as you can see, supply-wise is not really showing up all that much yet. Now the lurker den is going down, and I'm gonna follow this up with more and more queens, more and more drones, and just trying to establish a massive economy here before really starting to produce a big army. It looks like I'm actually satisfied with the amount of workers that I have at this point, so I can start to make some of the lurkers. Now, drone-wise, okay, just going back over the replay right here, drone-wise, I definitely could have been a little greedier. I could have probably made a couple more workers for this base, maybe move a couple over from this one over towards the newly established 4th base, and therefore would have had, you know, slightly bigger ecos. As you can see, I probably should have gone up to, you know, 80, 85 workers rather than 76, and that's once again just something that I am not completely used to. Now, at this point, I do very well know that I have a massive army, okay? I've scouted that my opponent went for a 4th base, so instead of taking, you know, the aggressive lead and trying to finish off the game here, I decide to follow this up with my own 5th base. Once again, something that I'm not used to. So, I'm playing macro-focused here. I'm trying to tech up much faster than I usually do. I probably could have already gotten the Hive out, as you can see Infestation Pit going down right now. Going for an army composition that I'm not used to, and I'm sort of just letting the Protoss do whatever he pleases. Now, I guess the problem that I was having with that, and I do add on some more workers here, but I think the reason that I was doing that for the most part is just because I was stuck in that Heart of the Swarm mindset, where I'm like, okay, if he maxes out, I'm likely not going to be able to kill him. I need to make sure his army stays small. I need to make sure that I will be able to eventually overpower him by simply, you know, attacking over and over and over again, and eventually I'll likely run out of steam. And that does work, it does work, but obviously the higher you go up the ladder, like let's say I start facing a lot of Grandmasters, which actually has been happening as of late, I'm gonna be in a lot of trouble. Like, those guys will be able to hold it easily, and then I will be what? I will be having a similar economy, similar tech as the Protoss. That's not a situation you want to be in. So, when you're ahead, which is obviously the case if you play 3 base versus someone who's just taking that 3rd base, you can get more ahead by taking a 4th base and tacking up, rather than taking the risk to finish off the game at that point. So, one of the other things we have also talked about is always having a transition ready to go, and that is what I'm trying to achieve here as well. Going up for the Greater Spire as soon as possible. I should have gotten the Spire right at the exact same time as I am getting this, the Hive as well. And right here, I wanted to move out for just a second. I'm like, no, I shouldn't be moving out. I should wait a little bit longer. Just max out first, and then eventually we'll move out. Now that +2 attack is finishing up, now I think it's a good moment to, you know, start actually moving across the map and just establishing, you know, the dominance that we've got. So even though my army supply is not going to be nearly as impressive as when we play Roach Ravager, Zergling, for example, we managed to max out super quickly. My army is significantly stronger than that, you know, in that point in the game. But most importantly, I have different follow-ups planned. I can go for Muta switch, I can go for a Great Aspire switch, I can go for a lot of other army. But at this point, while I'm definitely not making this engagement perfect either, you will notice very quickly that my opponent has very little to hold on to this to this army. So I checked out the amount of phoenixes that he had right there. I only saw a couple. Seemed like he was adding on a bunch of oracles or whatever, and I wasn't too worried about that. He is focused on a ground-based army. Lurkers absolutely dominate a ground-based army. Disruptors are not gonna be very, you know, common at this point, and as long as I spread out my lurkers, it's not gonna achieve all that much. So my opponent is gonna start moving in. Lurkers are burrowed down. I'm trying to spread them out to the best of my abilities, moving the queens forward as well, hitting those transfuses, not quite perfectly yet, but making sure my army stays alive for much longer than it usually would. And as you can see, I'm barely dropping any supply here. I'm barely dropping any supply, unburrowing the lurkers, making sure they are moved forward at least slightly, starting to rain chaos to this base. At this point, I'm getting the Great Aspire, switching into the Brute Lords as well, already getting the Corruptors to try and achieve exactly that. And instead of trying to finish off the game early, I took the guaranteed, you know, fact that I could take a fourth base since my opponent won't have very much of anything. And I follow it up with a much stronger army that I'm used to playing. So while there's definitely a ton of things to work on, and definitely there is a lot of practice, you know, left for me to do to scout better, to figure out better what is going on, I would say we're definitely making progress. And I hope you enjoyed watching this video with some more heavy strategy talk, because a lot of you pointed out in the previous one that I uploaded about Zerg vs Protoss that you really do enjoy seeing those. So I hope you enjoyed watching this one as well. If you haven't already, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. And I want to thank you all for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one.